Hello, I'm Ross Broadstock, and this is another instalment from Britain's Hidden History, where we look into some of the stories that have become hidden over time, or in this case, are in plain view and certainly not hidden. The Sutton Hoo treasure trove must be the most famous find in Britain, but has been labelled as something else. Now, I realise it's a controversial subject, and all I ask is people to keep an open mind and look at the evidence, and then please fire away with your comments in the comments section, and we'll have a discussion about it. But the strange thing is, despite this being found in Britain, and there being a lot of clues to suggest it could well be British, this doesn't really seem to have been properly explored by the mainstream, although it has by other researchers. Now, the most notable of which is Alan Hassel, who did fantastic work over many years tracking down and researching and recording Britain's hidden history. And he has a website, which I'll put the links in the show notes. Unfortunately, he passed away a little while ago, and the website's been a bit mothballed, and we are retrieving and saving a lot of the documents. And the research that he'd done was very important. He was a key metal detectorist. He was able to develop a way of looking down as far as 30 feet below ground level and deciding if something was ferrous or non-ferrous. He was an expert photographer. He did a lot of research. Now, he was based in London, so he wasn't pushing in a Welsh agenda or anything like that. His main interest was looking at East of Britain. And one which caught his attention, for example, was London and the London stone, or the Brutus stone, which would have been in Troy Novantium, as London was referred to in the time of Edward I. So we looked at the Brutus stone, which we'll be looking at another occasion, and how important that is as part of British history, and how they hacked 2/3 of it away to make room for road widening, and the remains are now in the sort of front of a bank. But there we go, that's another story. Now, with his research skills and his way of looking at evidence and finding evidence, he worked in closely with Wilson and Blackett at different points. And one thing you'll notice about their books, and when they talk, Wilson and Blackett are more than happy to give credit where credit's due and to share other people's work and, fully credited. So if you, again, looking at the book The Trojan War of 650 BC, and although it's mostly about ancient history, one of the great surprises you always get in a Wilson and Blackett book is suddenly here's this whole section about Sutton Hoo. Just like a little, what they call in the films these days, an Easter egg sitting there for you to unwrap and enjoy. So I'm going to read mostly from that, not only from that, and have a look at how that's described and how we get to this conclusion that the fact Sutton Hoo is British should at least be considered. At the moment, it seems to be totally discounted as being an impossible fairy tale. So if we can just shift a little bit to, it's a possibility, and then we can start to have a mature discussion about the merits of whether or not it's more British or more Saxon. And our little friend Dave says, do I look Saxon? We'll be coming on to him at the end. So in the meantime, let's look at how Sutton Hoo is discovered and how it's described in the book on page 86 is where we're starting. So we're quoting, "One of Alan Hassel's projects was to take a close look at the Sutton Hoo treasures in the British Museum. The largest grave mound at Sutton Hoo was excavated in 1939, in the summer just before World War II broke out. The archaeologists did a very good job indeed, and they were able to completely expose the entire shape of a large boat that had been buried in a mound, although not a scrap of timber remained. They exposed evidence of the ancient planking, and of row upon row of large iron bolts that had been used to secure the wooden planking together. And the iron bolts is crucial at this point. Rows of bolts that lay in gently curling rows outwards from the vanished keel, and upwards from the vanished stern, and from the upward curling bow of the vanished ship. This remarkable find immediately raised the question of who had owned this ship. It was known from the time of Julius Caesar that the British and their kinsmen in what are now the Breton and Normandy areas of France did use large iron bolts to secure the planks of their ocean-going ships. The British had access to the large iron deposits, the largest in Europe at the time. This is long before the Swedish iron ore resources were tapped in modern times, in those days South Wales in Glamorgan was the main source of iron. And yet the Anglo and Saxons, they used wooden dowels in their ships. This immediately raised the question of whether this ship that was buried in a grave mound was British or immigrant, German, Anglo or Saxon. Right, I'm going to come away from the book just for a moment, because just to reinforce that, if you look for this information, there's a reference from Carver himself, the archaeologist. And if you search for information, this is the information. This is still the mainstream. It's not really doubted that the first clue was the iron ship rivets, as they're called here. And they were found in 1938. They continued to 1939, the excavations. Iron rivets were found, which enabled the Mound 2 grave to be interpreted as a small boat. This is brilliant archaeology. And this is what archaeology does really, really well, taking physical clues and reconstructing. Where it goes from there is another issue, but the actual physical part of the job, brilliant. Carver's reinvestigation revealed that there was a rectangular plank-lined chamber, 5 metres, that's 16 feet long, by 2 metres, that's 6'7" wide, sunk below the land surface, with a body and grave goods laid out in it. A small ship had been placed over this in an east-west alignment before a large earth mound was raised. And as we'll see in the next part of the book, this fits perfectly with British burial techniques. If you look, across Wales, for example, you will find plenty of examples of boat-shaped burial mounds. And the other thing I like to look for there is the east-west alignment, which implies a Christian burial. And at the time, the Angles and Saxons were known to be pagan, non-Christian, whereas the British were Christian. So if you look at the story, the mainstream story of the rather flimsy story that an Angle king named Redwald, is his burial mound, and he was most certainly would have been pagan. And as we'll see, there's more and more clues and indicators to show this was a Christian burial site. So now, one of the rebuttals I've heard, or concerns, is that, Saxons and Vikings and whatever, Angles, they could also use iron rivets in their boats. But this doesn't seem to be the mainstream consensus on this. Maybe they could, maybe they did. I'm sure there's extreme examples. But if your main clue is to do with iron bolts, that's how it's discovered, then that should be followed up, surely. So if we look now, for example, this research did, what are we in now? April 2020. During the C-19 lockdown. And you'll see here, talking about Viking ships and Saxon ships, you'll see very similar. All Viking ships are clinker built. The planks were overlapped at one end, and in the clinker shipbuilding, you start from the outside first and then put a frame inside it. The keel is joined to the stem and stern posts by trenails, which are wooden pegs. Some people call them trenails, some call them tree nails. It's basically a wooden dowel system that wedges in and forms a very airtight bond. So this isn't a question of whether or not the iron rivets are better or the wooden pegs are better. It's the point that in general terms, the Nordic and Germanic shipbuilders use wooden pegs or tree nails, whereas the British use iron bolts. And here was a site found. The whole identity was found because of the iron bolts. We also had a situation where the boat would signify a British burial, the orientation. And if people are thinking, well, we know about the iron bolts, this is a strange one. I need someone to explain to me, because if you look what's going on now with the Sutton Hoo site and the projects that are taking place around it, here's one of them, the Sutton Hoo Ships Company, as it's called. They are making replica boat of Sutton Hoo, and they are using wooden tree nails. They're not using the iron bolts. The very first clue which located the site was the iron bolts, and yet it's still being pushed, this idea of tree nails or trenels, the wooden dowel system. So it's all very strange why this is being persisted with, when the original boat clearly would have been iron bolt built, and yet here we are building a replica of it. And they're looking for volunteers. What they do is fantastic. It's a great looking group. I've only seen their website. And you can go along and help build a ship or something. Anyway, let's put this back to the book again. As Alan Hassel points out, the grave of King Kerry Longsword, who fought the Romans successfully from AD 52 to 74, is at the boat-shaped mound at Nash Point. And you can see our video on that. If you go through the videos, you'll find one. You can see the site for yourself. The boat-shaped grave of King Meirig, the father of King Arthur II, is also inside a huge boat-shaped mound and ditch enclosure, which is on Mynyddig the Gair, a fortress mountain. I've also got videos on that, but I need to pick out particularly which one is the grave mound. But have a look. There's plenty of them around. But this particular grave mound is around 120 feet long and 30 feet wide. So that's a lot bigger than Sutton Hoo. And the songs of the graves identify the site of the grave of Bedwyr ap Pedrog, who is known in the Arthurian romances as Sir Bedivere. Is also clearly boat-shaped. This fact and other traceable evidence of recorded and known British boat-shaped burials raises questions. Right, other evidence. He then noticed the remarkable reconstructed purse that was found in the Sutton Hoo ship burial. The leather had rotted away, but the jewelled and ornamented parts of the purse remained intact, and so restoration was possible. You can see the layout on the screen. They've done a wonderful job. The immediate and plainly obvious fact was that there were representations that appeared to be of the widely known Gilgamesh figure clearly exhibited on this ancient purse. The Gilgamesh epic of the exploits of King Gilgamesh of the ancient city of Uruk is the major epic story of the ancient Mesopotamia and Syria and Asia Minor. This was not a story known to the Angles or the Saxons. There is a Nordic explanation that Odin's been attacked by two giant wolves. But if you look closer at the wolves, the wolves, yes, the animals have a mane for a start, which implies it would be a lion. And it quite possible, combined with the curly tails, that lions are being represented. This could also introduce the Bible story of Daniel being thrown into the lion's den in Babylon. If this is the case, then the attribution of the manufacture of this purse by a craftsman and also the owner's nationality as Germanic Angle king is called into question. The human figure is not shown grasping the animals by the throat. Anyway, so this is the Gilgamesh epic, would have been known to our Chaldean Hittite ancestors. And then we go on to how they arrived in Britain. And you go through the migration stories, which we're going to cover on other videos. Now, Alan Hassel also looked closely at a set of golden spoons that were found in the Sutton Hoo ship. Now, the thing that immediately caught his eye was the fact that these spoons had inscriptions cut into their long handles. Equally important, there is a very clear Christian cross incised on the handle of each spoon, immediately below the bowl and before the lettering. Once again, the known fact is that the Angles and Saxons were illiterates. And it was not until King Alfred, the one known for being a poor baker, sent messages to Wales, Scotland and Ireland for Geraint of Fardd Glas, for John Scotius and for John Egena to introduce writing into his kingdom, that literacy finally arrived to the Anglo-Saxons. Geraint, who became known as in England as Asa, and with him was John Scotius and John Origina. So like the Welshman, the Scotsman and Irishman were called in. Sounds like the start of a joke. They are the legendary founders, anyway, of Oxford University. So for those who know, Oxford University is a Welshman, a Scotsman and an Irishman founded that, as the English was still illiterate at the time. And bear in mind, when we say English, we're talking about Saxon here. Most of the people living in England are actually British. They're not Anglo-Saxon. But again, that's another story. As the golden spoons from Sutton Hoo clearly had a form of Cymric Colburn alphabet cut into them, and we're going to look further into this in a future slide in a minute, it's clearly almost an impossibility for this ship burial to be either Angle or Saxon. Now, Alan Hassel, who is an expert photographer, then looked at another major Sutton Hoo relic. There is a remarkable ornamented golden bowl that was found in the Sutton Hoo ship burial. This bowl is very clearly decorated with ornamentation that shows what can best be described as a number of Maltese-style Christian crosses. These would indicate that it was a Christian person who was being buried, and this immediately raises the question of the race and nationality of the person. There is, however, something that is even more remarkable, as there is incised on the centre of the Sutton Hoo golden bowl, as plain for everyone to see, there is the symbol known as the Star of David. This six-pointed star symbol appears on the flag of modern Israel. In the centre of the Star of David symbol is an 8-petalled flower, and this is a royal symbol found in many ancient Egyptian scenes. So again, we've got this British connection with the Middle East, and Egypt in particular. Set around inside the 6 points of the star are 6 representations of lilies, and the lily was an ancient royal emblem that was later used by the French kings. Another symbol appears outside, and immediately between the outer points of the stars are 6 doves. And again, doves are important symbols of Hebrew Judean law. And doves were a bird that were a frequent sacrifice made to Israel's God Jehovah. Next page. To round matters off at this stage, the remains of a distinctively shaped lyre were found in the Sutton Hoo boat. And these pieces were successfully reconstructed to show how this musical instrument might have appeared. And what I've done here, I have put the construction, copy of the reconstruction, and on the other side you can see a 1781 watercolour of what's called a Welsh crwth, or crwyth. Sometimes a Y is included. Now this painting, I've included this one because it's well before anything was found at Sutton Hoo, so it's not been added later. I can see these objects, hear a bit more about them, and I know people are still making them in Wales, and you still can't get one. So, right, so it's but it would seem, I return to the book, but for the research, for the academics, it would seem that Cymric Wales is once again being located on the dark side of the moon, as far as the British Museum is concerned, because this Sutton Hoo Lyre just happens to be the same shape as the ancient Cymric crwyth, a guitar-like musical instrument that was in use until fairly modern times. And like I said, some people are making them again now. So, with the Egyptian, with the dates of the lyre as Sutton Hoo around 630 AD, and the Cymry Welsh from time immemorial to around 1800 and onwards, using these, you have to wonder as well if old King David and Solomon used the same musical instrument. It's a very, very ancient instrument. Would seem to be brought here from the Near East. Just what a very clear 6-pointed Star of David symbol doing set prominently in the very centre of the elaborate ornamentation of the golden bowl in the Sutton Hoo ship is a matter of huge interest. I would add to that, it should be a matter of huge interest. It doesn't seem to be. I mean, why would a Saxon have the Star of David in the middle of their one of their items? The design is hard to miss than it is to see. In the presence of this design that is peculiar to the kings of Israel, is taken into account with all the other alleged Anglo-Saxon relics, records and remains, there is a substantial case to be made for a king who was descended from the tribe of Judah, whose ancestors arrived in Britain around 504 to 500 BC, being the person whose monument this Sutton Hoo mound was. All the evidence points in this direction, and it gives substantial credence to the ages-long belief that ancient Davidic kings were in ancient Britain. Now, the Cymric people lived mainly in the west of Britain, but there were Cymric kings right through the Midlands of what is now England, and in Warwickshire, in Leicestershire. One Cymric king of Leicestershire is recorded in the Brutus of England around AD 720. So this is another myth. It didn't just... the British kings kept going, and a lot were absorbed and became part of this sort of Saxon English empire. The people didn't change. It's like thinking of France in World War II. The Germans might have rolled through and invaded and conquered, but the people there were still French and they still spoke their own language. And it would seem that we need to have a relook at the whole idea of the Anglo-Saxon invasion, because most people in England are not Anglo or Saxon. They're actually British. But why that story came about and how it came about, of them being made Anglo-Saxon, is for another day. Anyway, what we're going to do here is we have a Cymric or Davidic link with symbols plain for all to see on the Sutton Hoo golden bowl. We have straight stroke ancient British Colburn writing incised on 2 golden spoons. We have a ship made with iron bolts in British fashion and not in Anglo-Saxon fashion. Now what we're going to do now is attempt to try to read the short inscriptions on the handles of the 2 gold spoons found at Sutton Hoo. Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett did this, and they did it, and there's been no apparent effort at decipherment into what is called Anglo-Saxon. You can't translate it to Anglo-Saxon. It doesn't work. So what we have, the short inscriptions running along the spoon, described by the Christian cross. Okay, so if you look at there, you can see the CAU and there's LOC. Or because it's a straight edge U, that could be a W. There's no V in Welsh, so it's either, we'll look on to what it could mean. It's either cow or cow. And one of the great things to remember with the Welsh language is this dual meanings. It comes up again and again in deciphering hieroglyphics, and it also comes in when you're looking at how you read the Colburn and the ancient British writing. So you have to bear that in mind. And it's not a case of choosing between conflicting meanings. The meanings, these dual meanings and multiple meanings, are wonderful because they give a more complete picture with only using a limited number of words. So it is brilliant, and we're going to do more research on that soon and show you how that all works. If you aren't seen, there's a lot more of it on the Trojan War book. Anyway, so what we're going to do here, we've got the 2, you can see the letters there yourselves, across, CAV, like I said, there's no V, so it's either a W or a U. And then we've got the LOC, which could be a double LOC due to the way they spelt things. Okay, so what we have first of all, we have cow, which means enclosed. And this could be in the sense of being enclosed in a protected manner. And they got cow with a W, which is a graduated bard. So it means a learned person, a qualified person, someone who has been trained to be wise and knowledgeable. And then we have clock, and that basically means a pen or a fold, as in a sheepfold. Now what this clock is one of these great words where we have these other words coming off it as the same root. So implied within this, we have cloch, meaning a shelter or refuge, clochesi, to cherish or to shelter, and then we've got clochiad, which is to protect. So if these 2 spoons are sacred spoons that might have been used in an anointing or coronation ceremony, then this might start to make sense. They're not just random marks. The inscription on the second spoon appears to be either now lock or now lock with W incised on the handle. And once again, the 4th letter is difficult to read. There is a possibility that it is a D. Otherwise, it suggests an L. So the problem is it's small and fragile, so have a look yourself. But either way, it works either way. So we may have now or otherwise nouth. Now means kin. So it's like your family and people who are near to you. And then nouth means patronage or protection or support. And then we got the och ending, which just means from or of. So you combine those together, you've got this wonderful picture. It could be both those meanings because it all ties together very nicely. So we got, if these brief phrases can be considered as associated with a qualified person who is able to offer shelter or protection, or as to be a person who is offered some form of, say, Christian shelter or protection. Maybe this is talking about him coming into the fold upon his death and being protected and cherished and missed by his people. Or maybe it's meant to be read the other way around, where he's the protector who encloses and looks after his people. But it's quite a wonderful thing. I tend to go with as a burial. Maybe it's some sort of Christian shelter or protection. And then it's possible that these golden spoons are part of the equipment required in some form of anointing ritual. The presence of a clear Christian cross symbol on each spoon that precedes the short inscriptions clearly points towards the spoons being used in Christian ceremonial occasions. There are then 2 strange designs. We go back to the purse again now. Purse made of gold and jewel stones. These designs show a large bird of prey attacking a duck. And anyone who has read the Cymric Mabinogi solar and stellar stories, they were hidden and kept alive by calling them Mabinogion as children's stories, But if you look at them, and there's more details on this in the Ark of the Covenant book on how to read them, they're actually Mabinogi, and they are these, like most cultures around the world. Why should Britain be any different? These stories explain the solar system and the planets and all that kind of stuff. Really fascinating. So we have Peredir, one of the main characters, who is Steel Shirt. So Peredir sees a bird of prey kill a similar duck and causes the red blood to flow and to mark the white snow on the ground. That's in the Mabinogi. So if you look there, you can see the big bird jumping on the small bird, attacking it. So just why is this British motif portrayed on a magnificent Sutton Hoo purse? If the Sutton Hoo burial allegedly was not British, if it's not British, why is it there? So he summarises that with "Well done, Mr. Hassel." I have to say this is one of the many wonderful things he's done. But something else he mentions in the book, but I want to talk about separately, was the most... You might want to argue about this, and he could say maybe it is, maybe it isn't, okay? About migrations and tying them with Christian symbols. It seems a very powerful picture. And the iron bolts and the whole lot together, certainly enough for the possibility of this being British not to be totally discounted. But the biggest thing, I think this is one of the biggest examples of mass, what's called cognitive dissonance, where something stares you in the face and everyone knows the image of the Sutton Hoo mask and the Sutton Hoo helmet. It stares you in the face. And before I go on to the next slide, what is the most noticeable facial feature about this person? Just think about that with a blank mind. There's one really incredibly noticeable feature, which gives a massive clue as to where this all should go. And of course, it's the big moustache. He's got a most wonderful moustache. Why is that there? Why, oh why, would he have a moustache depicted? Surely this mask is either there to act as a sort of death mask or a portrait of the warrior, or to represent the warrior, or to show him in his glory. Put it this way, if you're an Anglo or a Saxon and you're very proud of your big beard, which you're very famous for, you'd be horrified to have to be buried with a moustache. It just doesn't make any sense. And to me, beyond all other things, all the stuff about the musical instrument, the iron bolts, the Christian symbology, the fact you can actually read the writing on the spoon when the Saxons were literate, all that makes a very convincing case. But the biggest thing of all is this British famously wore the moustaches. I have to say I was brought up in Wales, and a lot of Welsh boys still wearing moustaches. That was pretty recently. It's think about Ian Rush, the footballer. This is like a symbol of Welshness. I mean, does it look Saxon? Why is it considered Saxon? That's what I want to hear. I'm looking forward to the feedback. I'm looking forward to hearing comments. On what basis would this be Saxon? Because the other thing to bear in mind as well is the high quality of the workmanship and the high quality metalworking was concentrated around Britain. This was the centre of metalworking. You had everything there, copper and iron, gold, tin, all this is part of Britain. It would have been an incredibly wealthy state. All this kind of thing would have been going on, and there's so much archaeology to support advanced metalworking techniques and producing beautiful, sophisticated items. And if you look closely as well, you see those kind of familiar themes with the infinite knots, which is a kind of, I hate the word Celtic, because the British were not Celtic. Again, we'll deal with that another time. But those intricate knots to give the symbols of infinity. And I'm sure if we had a look around the rest of the helmet, we'd find more clues there as well. But slap bang in your face, anybody who's watching this video, I'd imagine, has looked at the Sutton Hoo mask time and time again. I know I looked at it 100 times. And at some point, once that penny drops, why is the big moustache there? Surely that makes him British. Then it's really, really difficult to come to terms with the idea that it's actually Saxon. And this whole thing needs looking at again. So I hope you found that interesting. I'd love to see the comments. I'm just as interested to see comments saying, yeah, why it's Saxon as those saying why it's British. But come on, isn't it reasonable that this shouldn't be discounted as complete nonsense? So there we go. There'll be more of these coming along soon. So thank you very much for watching to the end. Please share this as widely as possible. I think loads of people will be interested in this, and it'd be great to get a discussion going and see if we can make a little bit, maybe, of what is now Britain's hidden history a little bit less hidden. So until the next time, to everyone, Heddwch.